The courtroom fell silent as the designer heel connected with her swollen belly, a pregnant woman's scream piercing through Seattle's most prestigious courthouse. But the real shock came when the judge's gavel clattered to the floor, his face draining of color as he stared at the victim, recognition flooding his eyes for reasons he couldn't yet explain. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Before we begin, please click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The September rain hammered against the courthouse windows like accusations, each drop a reminder that Seattle could be beautiful and brutal in the same breath. Hannah Miller stood at the base of the granite steps, one hand cradling her 7-month belly, the other clutching a manila folder that contained everything: restraining order applications, hospital records, photographs of bruises that had long since faded but never really disappeared. Her baby kicked, as if sensing her mother's fear, and Hannah whispered, "I know, Grace. I know." She hadn't named the baby yet, not officially, but in her heart, this child was Grace. Because if Hannah survived this, if she escaped Grant Donovan's shadow, it would be nothing short of grace itself. The crowd had started gathering at dawn. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like flowers seeking sun. Protesters held signs, some supporting her, others calling her a gold digger, a liar, a woman trying to destroy a good man's reputation. Hannah had stopped reading them weeks ago. The truth was simpler and more terrible than any sign could convey. Grant Donovan, millionaire real estate developer, philanthropist, and Seattle's golden boy, had spent 3 years slowly destroying her. Hannah. A voice cut through the noise. Mary Collins, her attorney, rushed toward her, umbrella raised against the rain. Mary was 50-something, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of face that had seen too many women like Hannah walk through her office doors. "Don't look at them. Eyes forward, head up. Remember what we practiced." Hannah nodded, but her legs felt like water. 7 months pregnant, exhausted from sleepless nights in a borrowed apartment, living off the charity of women's shelters and the one credit card Grant hadn't discovered and cancelled, this was not how she'd imagined her life at 32. They climbed the steps together, Mary's hand steady on Hannah's elbow. The questions came like bullets. "Hannah, is it true you're only after his money? Did you provoke him? Is the baby even his?" That last one made Hannah's stomach turn. Grant had been planting those seeds for weeks, his PR team working overtime to paint her as an opportunist who trapped him with a pregnancy that might not even be his. Never mind that they'd been married for 3 years. Never mind the hospital records, the police reports she'd been too afraid to file until now, the texts from his mistress that had started appearing on her phone 6 months ago. The mistress. Bella Rossi. Hannah spotted her the moment they entered the courthouse lobby. Bella stood beside Grant like a trophy, all gleaming dark hair and designer clothes that probably cost more than Hannah's entire wardrobe. She was 26, beautiful in that effortless way that came from never having worried about anything real. Grant had introduced them once, at a charity gala, back when Hannah still believed her husband's lies about late business meetings. "My marketing director," Grant had said, his hand on the small of Bella's back in a way that made Hannah's skin crawl even then. Now, Bella wasn't hiding. She wore her role as mistress like another expensive accessory, and Grant seemed to relish it. They posed for cameras, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling as if this were a movie premiere instead of a courthouse hearing about domestic violence. "Don't react," Mary whispered. "That's what they want." Hannah forced herself to breathe, to keep walking toward the courtroom entrance. Security guards waved them through metal detectors. The hallway smelled like old wood and desperation, a scent Hannah had come to know too well. Inside courtroom 4, the air felt different, heavier, charged with the weight of justice that might or might not come. Hannah took her seat at the plaintiff's table, Mary beside her, and tried not to look at Grant. But she could feel his presence, the way you feel a storm approaching even before the first drops fall. Judge Samuel Hayes entered at precisely 9 o'clock. He was tall, maybe 65, with silver hair and dark skin that reminded Hannah of her grandfather's old photographs, the ones from before her mother had thrown them all away in one of her rages. The judge carried himself with quiet authority, and when his eyes swept the courtroom, Hannah felt something strange, a flicker of familiarity. But that was impossible. She'd never seen this man before in her life. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Hannah struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her belly. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she winced. Judge Hayes's eyes locked on her for a moment, his expression unreadable, before he took his seat. "Be seated," he said, his voice resonant and steady. "We're here today for case number 2024, DV 8847, Miller vs. Donovan. This is a hearing on the plaintiff's request for a restraining order and preliminary custody arrangements." Mary stood. "Your Honor, Mary Collins representing Hannah Miller. We're seeking immediate protection for my client and her unborn child from Mr. Grant Donovan, who has exhibited a pattern of escalating domestic violence." "Your Honor," interrupted a smooth, expensive voice. Grant's attorney, Richard Brennan, rose from his chair like a shark sensing blood. "This is nothing more than a desperate attempt by Mrs. Miller to extort money from my client during divorce proceedings. We have evidence that directly contradicts every allegation." "You'll both have your turns," Judge Hayes cut in. His eyes returned to Hannah, and again, that strange look crossed his face. Recognition? Concern? Hannah couldn't place it, but it made her heart race. "Ms. Collins, present your opening statement." Mary outlined the case with clinical precision, 3 years of escalating abuse, starting with verbal attacks that eroded Hannah's self-worth, progressing to physical violence that sent her to the emergency room twice, both times with injuries she'd lied about to the doctors because Grant had been standing right there, his hand on her shoulder, his smile reassuring everyone that his clumsy wife was fine. The isolation from friends and family. The financial control. The texts from Bella that made it clear this wasn't just an affair but a campaign to push Hannah out entirely. And now, Mary said, 7 months pregnant and fearing for her life and her child's life, Mrs. Miller has finally found the courage to speak up. "We have hospital records, photographs, witness statements from neighbors who heard." "Hearsay and fabrication," Brennan interrupted. "Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman, a philanthropist who's donated millions to this city. These accusations are..." Judge Hayes raised his hand. "Mr. Brennan, I've already warned you about interruptions. Continue, Ms. Collins." But Hannah barely heard the rest. She was watching Grant, and Grant was watching her with that smile, the one that looked charming to everyone else but that Hannah knew meant danger. He was enjoying this. Enjoying watching her squirm, knowing that no matter what she said, his money and influence would twist the truth until she became the villain of her own story. Bella leaned over and whispered something in Grant's ear. He laughed, soft and low, and Hannah felt 7 months of terror crystallize into something sharper, rage. Judge Hayes noticed. His gaze shifted between Hannah and Grant, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Miller, would you like to make a statement?" Hannah looked at Mary, who nodded encouragement. This was it. Her chance to speak, to make them understand what the bruises and hospital records couldn't fully convey, the soul-deep fear of living with a man who controlled everything, who made you question your own reality, who could smile at you over breakfast and then slam you against a wall before dinner. She stood slowly, her legs shaking. "Your Honor, That's when Bella moved. Later, people would argue about whether it was planned or spontaneous. Whether Bella acted on her own rage or if Grant had somehow signaled her. But in that moment, all Hannah knew was sudden movement, a flash of expensive perfume and designer clothes, and then pain exploded through her abdomen as Bella's stiletto heel connected with her pregnant belly. Hannah's scream tore through the courtroom like something primal, something that belonged to every mother who'd ever feared for her child. She collapsed, her hands clutching her stomach, feeling the baby's frantic movements inside her, wondering if her daughter was dying, if she was dying. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Bailiffs rushed forward. Judge Hayes shot to his feet, his gavel crashing down over and over, but the sound was drowned out by shouting, by Mary's voice yelling for an ambulance, by Grant's lawyer trying to control the situation, by Grant himself. And through it all, Hannah heard Bella's voice, high and shrill, "You don't deserve him. You never deserved any of this." The last thing Hannah saw before the darkness came was Judge Samuel Hayes's face, stricken with horror and something else, something that looked almost like recognition, as he stared down at her from his bench, a complete stranger whose eyes held storms Hannah couldn't begin to understand. Then the world went black, and all she could hear was her own heartbeat and the desperate prayer repeating in her mind, "Please, Grace. Please survive. Please." The ambulance sirens screamed through downtown Seattle, cutting through traffic like a knife through water. Hannah drifted in and out of consciousness, each bump in the road sending fresh waves of agony through her abdomen. A paramedic, young, with kind eyes, kept talking to her, his voice steady and calm even though Hannah could see the worry etched across his face. "Stay with me, Hannah. We're almost there. Your baby's heart rate is strong. Do you hear me? Strong and steady. Strong and steady." Hannah clung to those words like a lifeline. Grace was fighting. Her daughter was a fighter, just like her mother had learned to be, too late, perhaps, but still fighting. Mary rode in the ambulance with her, holding Hannah's hand so tight it hurt, but Hannah was grateful for the pain. It meant something was real, something beyond the nightmare that kept replaying in her mind, Bella's face twisted with rage, the sudden movement, the impact, the crushing realization that this woman actually wanted to kill her baby. "Did they arrest her?" Hannah managed to whisper, her throat raw from screaming. Mary's expression darkened. The bailiffs restrained her. "I don't know what happens next, but Hannah, everyone saw it. Every single person in that courtroom, all those cameras outside, everyone saw what she did. What she did. What Grant's mistress did." But where had Grant been in that moment? Hannah tried to remember through the haze of pain and shock. Had he tried to stop Bella? Had he looked surprised? Or had there been something else in his eyes, satisfaction, perhaps, that someone had finally done what he'd probably fantasized about doing himself? The ambulance pulled up to Seattle Grace Hospital's emergency entrance. Doors flew open, and suddenly Hannah was moving fast, ceiling lights blurring overhead, voices calling out medical terminology she didn't understand. Someone was asking about her blood type, her medical history, whether she had any allergies. "The baby," Hannah gasped. "Please, just save the baby. We're going to save you both," a woman's voice responded, firm and reassuring. Hannah turned her head slightly and saw a black woman in scrubs, maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen everything. Her name tag read, Helen Morrison, RN. "I'm Helen, honey, and I'm going to be right here with you. The doctors are coming, and we're going to take care of you and that little one. But I need you to stay calm, keep breathing, and trust us. Can you do that?" Hannah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Trust. That word felt foreign after 3 years with Grant, 3 years of learning that trust was just another weapon people used against you. But something in Helen's face made Hannah want to believe again. They rushed her into an examination room. Doctors swarmed around her, their hands gentle but efficient as they cut away her clothes, attached monitors, checked the baby's heartbeat. The sound filled the room, fast but steady, that beautiful whooshing rhythm that meant Grace was still alive. "Possible placental abruption," someone said. "Get an ultrasound in here now." "Any bleeding?" "Minimal so far, but we need to watch her closely." Hannah closed her eyes and prayed, not to the God her mother used to scream about during her drinking binges, not to any distant deity that had abandoned her time and again, but to something deeper. To the universe itself, maybe. To whatever force had gotten her this far. "Please. I'll do anything. Just let her live." The ultrasound machine was wheeled in, and cold gel was spread across Hannah's belly. She watched the screen, holding her breath, as the technician moved the wand across her skin. And then there she was, Grace, moving, her tiny heart beating strong, her little hands opening and closing as if reaching for her mother. "The baby looks good," the doctor said, and Hannah sobbed with relief. "But you've suffered blunt force trauma to the abdomen, Mrs. Miller. We're going to admit you for observation, probably for the next 48 to 72 hours. Any signs of distress, any bleeding, any contractions, we need to monitor everything carefully. At 7 months, if we have to deliver early, the baby has good odds, but we want to avoid that if possible." Hannah nodded, unable to speak. Mary squeezed her hand again. "The police are here," Helen said quietly, appearing at Hannah's bedside. "They need to take your statement. Are you up for that?" No. She wasn't up for anything except lying in this bed and listening to her daughter's heartbeat forever. But Hannah knew that if she didn't speak now, Grant would use every minute of her silence to build his defense, to twist this into something it wasn't. "Yes," she whispered. "Send them in." The detective who entered was in his 40s, with tired eyes and the kind of face that had seen too much violence. His badge identified him as Detective James Rhodes. He pulled up a chair beside Hannah's bed, his notepad already out. "Mrs. Miller, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened in that courtroom." Hannah took a shaky breath and recounted everything, standing up to give her statement, seeing Bella move, the kick, the explosion of pain. Rhodes wrote it all down, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "Did Miss Rossi say anything before or after the assault?" "After," Hannah said. She said I didn't deserve him. That I never deserved any of this." By him, she meant Grant Donovan. "Yes." Rhodes nodded, making notes. "And where was Mr. Donovan when this happened?" Hannah frowned, trying to remember. "He was sitting at the defendant's table." I don't remember if he tried to stop her." "The courtroom has cameras," Rhodes said. "We'll review the footage. But I need to ask you something else, Mrs. Miller. This wasn't the first incident of violence in your relationship with Grant Donovan, was it?" And there it was, the question that opened the floodgates. Hannah told him everything. The first time Grant had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, 3 months after their wedding. How he'd apologized so sweetly, bought her flowers, sworn it would never happen again. The gradual escalation, pushing, shoving, one slap that became 2, that became a pattern. The 2 emergency room visits she'd lied about. The way he controlled her money, her phone, her friendships until she was completely isolated. Rhodes listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily across the page. When Hannah finished, her voice hoarse and broken, he looked up at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Miller, I'm going to be straight with you. Bella Rossi was arrested at the courthouse. She's being charged with assault, potentially assault with intent to harm an unborn child, which carries serious prison time. But Grant Donovan wasn't arrested." Hannah's heart sank. "Why not?" "Because while what happened today was captured on camera, the historical abuse you've described is harder to prove. His lawyers are already claiming you're fabricating the past violence to support your divorce case. They're saying Bella acted alone, out of jealousy, and that Grant had no knowledge of what she planned to do." "That's not," Hannah started, but Rhodes held up his hand. "I believe you," he said quietly. "And I'm going to do everything I can to build a case against him. But you need to understand what you're up against. Grant Donovan has money, connections, and one of the best legal teams in the state. They're going to come after you hard." "Let them," Hannah said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Something had shifted inside her when Bella's foot had connected with her belly. The fear was still there, would probably always be there, but underneath it was something fiercer, a mother's rage. "I'm not backing down. Not anymore." Rhodes allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Because I don't think Judge Hayes is going to let this go either." "What do you mean?" "I was in that courtroom when it happened. I've seen a lot of reactions from judges over the years, but the way Hayes looked at you. Rhodes shook his head. It was personal somehow. Like he knew you. I've never met him before today. Maybe not. But something about you got to him. And in my experience, when a judge takes a personal interest in a case, things start happening. After Rhodes left, Helen returned to check Hannah's vitals. The nurse moved with practiced efficiency, but her touch was gentle, and when she looked at Hannah, there was understanding in her eyes. You've been through hell, haven't you? Helen said softly. Hannah laughed, but it came out more like a sob. Is it that obvious? Honey, I've worked in emergency rooms for 28 years. I know an abuse victim when I see one. And I know that what happened today wasn't the first time someone's hurt you. Fresh tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks. How do you survive it? How do you trust anyone again? Helen sat down on the edge of the bed, taking Hannah's hand. One day at a time. One good person at a time. You've got Mary, and she's a fighter. You've got that detective, and I could tell he believes you. And you've got me now, and I promise you, sweetie, nobody's going to hurt you in this hospital. Not on my watch. Thank you, Hannah whispered. Now, you need to rest. Doctor's orders. But first, Helen pulled something from her pocket, a small piece of paper. This came for you about an hour ago. A courier delivered it to the nurse's station, addressed to you specifically. Hannah took the paper with trembling hands. It was an envelope, cream-colored and expensive, with her name written in elegant handwriting across the front. No return address. Should I open it? She asked, fear creeping back into her voice. What if it was from Grant? From Bella? Some new threat, some fresh attempt to terrorize her. That's up to you, Helen said. But the courier said it was important. Said it was from someone who wanted to help. Hannah's fingers shook as she tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and the words written on it made her heart stop. Dear Hannah. I don't know how to say this, and I may be completely wrong. But when I saw you in my courtroom today, something shifted in my world. Your face, your eyes, even the way you carry yourself, it all reminded me of someone I loved very much, a long time ago. Her name was Catherine. Catherine Miller. We met in college, fell in love despite our family's objections, and she became pregnant. But her parents took her away before I could marry her, before I could even say goodbye. They told me she'd terminated the pregnancy and wanted nothing to do with me. I was 22 years old and heartbroken, and I believed them. I built a life anyway. Went to law school, became a judge, married someone else who could never quite fill the Catherine-shaped hole in my heart. And then today, 32 years later, you walked into my courtroom, a pregnant woman in danger, with the last name Miller, with eyes that looked just like Catherine's used to look when she was scared. I may be a foolish old man seeing connections that don't exist. But I need to ask you, was your mother's name Catherine? Did she ever mention a man named Samuel Hayes? If I'm right about this, if there's even a chance I'm right, then you're my daughter, Hannah. And I failed to protect you once, when I didn't even know you existed. But I won't fail you now. Please, if you're willing, let me help you. Let me be the father I should have been all along. Samuel Hayes. Hannah read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking so badly that the paper rattled. Helen watched her with concern. Honey. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Hannah looked up at the nurse, tears streaming freely now, her voice barely a whisper. I think I just found my father. Outside the hospital room, night was falling over Seattle. In a penthouse downtown, Grant Donovan sat with his lawyers, already crafting a strategy to destroy Hannah's credibility. In a jail cell, Bella Rossi paced and planned and seethed with rage. And in his chambers at the courthouse, Judge Samuel Hayes sat at his desk, staring at a photograph he'd kept hidden for 32 years, a young woman with bright eyes and a beautiful smile, the love he'd lost before he even knew what they'd created together. The war was only beginning. But for the first time in 3 years, Hannah Miller wasn't facing it alone. The hospital room was dark except for the soft glow of monitors tracking Grace's heartbeat. Hannah lay awake at 2 in the morning, one hand on her belly, the other clutching Judge Hayes's letter. She'd memorized every word by now, but still she read it again, searching for some proof that this wasn't just another cruel trick the universe was playing on her. Catherine Miller. Her mother's name. Hannah had spent most of her childhood trying to understand the woman who'd raised her, if you could call it raising. Catherine had been bitter, angry, drowning her demons in vodka and prescription pills. She'd never talked about Hannah's father, would fly into rages if Hannah even asked. "He's dead to us," Catherine would snarl. "Dead and gone, and good riddance." Hannah had always assumed her father was some deadbeat who'd abandoned them. It had never occurred to her that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't known she existed at all. She thought about her mother's parents, the grandparents she'd met only twice before they died. Cold, religious people who'd looked at Hannah like she was a mistake that needed correcting. They'd sent Hannah's mother money every month, but never love, never acceptance. And when Catherine had died of liver failure 5 years ago, they hadn't even come to the funeral. Had they lied? Had they really told Samuel Hayes that Catherine had terminated the pregnancy? Hannah's hand moved to the thin gold chain around her neck, the only piece of jewelry she owned that Grant hadn't bought her, hadn't controlled. It had been her mother's, one of the few things Catherine had kept from her past. A delicate locket with a tiny picture inside, a young Catherine, smiling in a way Hannah had never seen her smile in life. And next to Catherine in the photo, his arm around her shoulders, was a young black man with kind eyes and a bright future ahead of him. Hannah had always wondered who he was. Now she thought she knew. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Helen poked her head in, surprised to see Hannah awake. "Can't sleep?" the nurse asked, stepping inside. "Can't stop thinking," Hannah admitted. Helen checked the monitors, made notes on her chart, then sat down in the chair beside the bed. "You want to talk about that letter? You've been staring at it for hours." Hannah hesitated, then found herself telling Helen everything, about her mother, about the photograph in the locket, about Judge Samuel Hayes and his impossible claim. Helen listened without interrupting, her face thoughtful. "You know what I think?" Helen said when Hannah finished. "I think God works in mysterious ways. Or fate, or the universe, or whatever you want to call it. You walked into that courtroom looking for protection, and maybe you found more than you bargained for. But what if he's wrong? What if I'm not his daughter and I get my hopes up for nothing? Then you're no worse off than you were yesterday. But Hannah, sweetie, what if he's right? What if you've spent your whole life thinking you were alone in this world, and suddenly you're not?" The possibility was too big to hold, too fragile to believe in. Hannah had learned not to hope, not to trust, not to imagine that things could ever be good. Grant had taught her that lesson over and over until it was carved into her bones. "I'm scared," Hannah whispered. "Of course you are. You'd be crazy not to be. But being scared and being brave aren't opposites, honey. Sometimes they're the exact same thing." Before Hannah could respond, her phone buzzed on the bedside table. She picked it up, expecting another message from Mary with legal updates. Instead, she found 3 text messages from an unknown number, all sent within the last 10 minutes. "You think you're safe in that hospital? You think anyone believes your lies? You're going to pay for what you've done, you manipulative bitch." Hannah's blood ran cold. She showed the messages to Helen, whose expression hardened. "I'm calling security," Helen said, already reaching for the phone on the wall. "And Detective Rhodes needs to know about this." Within minutes, a security guard was posted outside Hannah's door, and Rhodes was on his way back to the hospital. But the damage was done. The brief moment of peace Hannah had felt, the tiny seed of hope that Judge Hayes's letter had planted, was drowning in fresh waves of fear. Grant was coming for her. Even from outside these walls, even with Bella in jail and the whole city watching, he was still finding ways to reach her, to remind her that she would never be free. Hannah curled onto her side, protecting her belly, and felt Grace kick in response. Her daughter was strong, fighting to survive. Hannah had to be strong too. She had to be braver than she'd ever been, had to find some reservoir of courage she didn't know she possessed. Because somewhere in this city, a man who might be her father was waiting for her answer. And somewhere else, a monster who'd made her his victim was plotting his next move. The question was, which one would reach her first? Mary arrived at 7 in the morning with coffee and grim news. She'd spent the night researching, making calls, building their case. Grant's legal team had already released a statement to the media. Bella Rossi had acted alone, motivated by jealousy and mental instability. Grant was portrayed as the real victim, a successful man whose unstable wife and deranged mistress had both turned on him. "They're painting you as vindictive and Bella as crazy," Mary said, her jaw tight with anger. Classic strategy. Divide and conquer. Make it look like two irrational women going after an innocent man. "The courtroom footage," Hannah said hoarsely. "Everyone saw what she did. Everyone saw Bella attack you. But Grant's team is arguing that he had no knowledge of her intentions, that he's as shocked and horrified as anyone. They're saying the restraining order should be granted against Bella, not Grant." Hannah's hands clenched into fists. "That's insane. He's been abusing me for 3 years. I know. And we're going to prove it. But Hannah, I need to ask you something." Mary pulled out her tablet, her expression serious. "Have you ever heard the name Victoria Donovan?" "No." "Who is she?" "Grant's second wife. She died 4 years ago, 6 months before he met you. The official report says she jumped from their balcony, suicide while suffering from postpartum depression." Hannah's stomach twisted. Postpartum? She'd given birth 3 months earlier. The baby died too, in the fall. Grant walked away as the grieving widower, collected a massive life insurance payout, and within a year he'd moved on. "To you." The room seemed to tilt. Hannah gripped the bed rails, her mind racing. "You think he—" "I think it's one hell of a coincidence," Mary said carefully. "I think we need to look into it more carefully. And I think Detective Rhodes is already doing exactly that." A knock at the door made them both jump. Helen opened it to reveal not Rhodes, but someone else entirely, Judge Samuel Hayes, still in his street clothes, looking older and more uncertain than he'd appeared on the bench. He held a small paper bag in one hand and hope in his eyes. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said quietly. "I know this is highly irregular. But Mrs. Miller, Hannah, I had to come. I had to know if you received my letter." Hannah looked at this man who claimed to be her father, this stranger with her mother's eyes, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "I got it," she whispered. "And I think I've been looking for you my whole life." Samuel Hayes's composure finally broke. Tears slipped down his face as he stepped into the room, and Hannah found herself reaching out her hand to him, this man she didn't know, this father she'd never had, this last impossible hope in a world that had tried so hard to destroy her. When his hand closed around hers, warm and steady and real, Hannah finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't going to fight this battle alone. Samuel Hayes sat beside his daughter's hospital bed like a man afraid she might vanish if he looked away. He'd brought tea, chamomile, he said, because Catherine used to drink it when she was stressed, and the gesture was so tender, so unexpectedly thoughtful, that Hannah had to blink back tears. "Tell me about her," Hannah said softly. "About my mother. Before she became, what she became." Samuel's face softened with memory. "She was brilliant. Studying literature at University of Washington, always with a book in her hand. She had this laugh that could light up a whole room, and she wasn't afraid of anything, or at least, she wasn't afraid until her parents found out about us." His voice grew heavy. They were from old money, very traditional, very, let's just say they had strong opinions about who their daughter should marry. A black law student from a working-class family wasn't part of their plan. So they separated you. They sent her away the moment they found out she was pregnant. Told me she'd gotten an abortion and wanted nothing to do with me. I was devastated, angry, but I was also 22 and stupid enough to believe them. I should have fought harder. I should have, his voice broke. I should have known Catherine would never do that. She wanted that baby. She wanted you. Hannah thought of her mother's bitter silences, the way Catherine would sometimes stare at Hannah with such resentment, as if looking at her daughter was looking at everything she'd lost. She never told me about you. She never told me anything except that my father was gone and I shouldn't ask questions. Her parents probably threatened her. Controlled her. They had money and power, and Catherine was alone with a baby. I can only imagine what they put her through to make her cooperate with their lies. Samuel reached into the paper bag and pulled out a faded photograph. I kept this hidden for 32 years. My wife, my ex-wife now, she never knew about Catherine. Never knew about the child I thought I'd lost. Hannah took the photograph with trembling hands. It showed a young Samuel and Catherine at some campus event, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Catherine's hand rested on her belly, just barely showing, maybe 3 or 4 months along. With her. You were going to marry her, Hannah whispered. I'd already bought the ring. Had a whole speech planned. But they took her away before I could ask, and by the time I tracked down where they'd sent her, I was told that the pregnancy was terminated and she'd moved on with her life. Samuel's hands clenched. I spent 32 years believing I'd lost both of you. And then yesterday, you walked into my courtroom. How did you know? How could you possibly know just by looking at me? Your eyes. They're exactly like Catherine's, same shape, same way of looking at the world, like you're carrying too much weight. And then there was your name. Miller. Catherine's maiden name. It felt like fate was screaming at me. He paused. And there's one more thing. That locket you're wearing. May I see it? Hannah's hand went to her throat. She'd worn her mother's locket for so long she'd almost forgotten it was there. She unclasped it and handed it to Samuel, who opened it with practiced ease, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. I gave this to Catherine for her 20th birthday, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She's wearing it in half the pictures I have of her. When I saw it around your neck yesterday, I knew. I just knew. Mary, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, cleared her throat. Judge Hayes, I don't mean to interrupt this moment, but we need to discuss the legal implications here. You presiding over Hannah's case when you're potentially her father, that's a conflict of interest. The defense will use it to claim bias, to get the restraining order thrown out. Samuel nodded grimly. I know. I've already filed a motion to recuse myself from the case. Judge Patricia Morrison will be taking over. She's tough, fair, and incorruptible. But before I stepped down, I wanted to make sure certain things were on the record. He pulled a folder from inside his jacket. I spent all night reviewing the courtroom footage from yesterday. Every angle, every moment. And I found something Grant Donovan's lawyers probably hoped no one would notice. He opened the folder and showed them a series of still images printed from the video. Hannah leaned forward, squinting at the pictures. They showed the moments right before Bella's attack, Grant sitting at the defendant's table, Bella standing beside him. But in one frame, clear as day, Grant's hand was visible making a subtle gesture toward Hannah. And Bella was looking directly at him when she moved. He signaled her, Hannah breathed. He told her to do it. It's not conclusive enough for a criminal conspiracy charge, Mary said, studying the images. A good defense attorney would argue it was just a coincidence, a random movement. Maybe, Samuel agreed. But it's enough to establish a pattern. Enough to make people start asking questions. And speaking of questions, he pulled out another document. I did some digging into Grant's history last night. Did either of you know he was married once before Victoria? Hannah shook her head, stunned. He told me Victoria was his first wife. That she was the love of his life who died tragically. There was another one. Jennifer Parker. Married to Grant for 2 years, divorced 8 years ago. The records are sealed, but I have a friend in family court who owed me a favor. The divorce was granted on grounds of domestic violence, and Jennifer was granted a restraining order that lasted 5 years. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Mary was already typing furiously on her tablet. If we can find Jennifer Parker, get her to testify. She moved out of state immediately after the divorce, Samuel said. Changed her name, went into hiding basically. But I have people looking for her. If she's willing to come forward, it establishes a pattern of abuse that predates both Victoria and Hannah. Hannah's mind was reeling. Grant had been doing this for years, marrying women, isolating them, abusing them. Victoria had died under suspicious circumstances. And now Grant had tried to destroy Hannah and their unborn baby. How many other women had there been? How many had suffered in silence because Grant's money and influence made him untouchable? There's something else, Samuel said quietly, his eyes meeting Hannah's. Before I recuse myself from your case, I want to do one thing as your judge. Then, if you'll allow it, I'd like to do everything else as your father. What thing? Hannah asked. I want to grant you that restraining order. Emergency order, effective immediately. Grant Donovan is not to come within 500 feet of you, not to contact you in any way, not to make any public statements about you or this case. If he violates it even once, he goes to jail. No bail, no second chances. His lawyers will fight it. Let them. I'm still the presiding judge until Morrison officially takes over tomorrow. And the courtroom footage of Bella's attack, combined with your testimony and medical records, is more than enough justification. Grant Donovan wanted to silence you, Hannah. But he made one crucial mistake. What's that? Samuel Hayes smiled, a fierce, protective smile that Hannah had never seen directed at her before, but that she recognized instinctively as the look of a father ready to go to war for his child. He hurt you in my courtroom. And now he's going to learn what happens when you threaten a judge's daughter. Outside the hospital, storm clouds gathered over Seattle. Detective Rhodes was following a lead that would crack the case wide open. Jennifer Parker was boarding a plane back to Washington, ready to tell her story. And in his penthouse, Grant Donovan was about to receive news that would shatter his carefully constructed world. The war had truly begun. But this time, Hannah had an army. The restraining order was signed by 10 o'clock that morning. Samuel Hayes wielded his judicial authority like a sword, his voice cold and absolute as he made the order official from Hannah's hospital room via video conference. Grant's lawyers tried to object, tried to delay, but Samuel shut them down with the kind of legal precision that came from 40 years on the bench. Mr. Donovan, Samuel said, staring directly into the camera, you are hereby ordered to stay 500 feet away from Hannah Miller at all times. No contact, direct or indirect. No social media posts. No statements to the press about her character or this case. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and incarceration without bail. Am I making myself clear? On the screen, Grant's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. His lawyer, Richard Brennan, whispered urgently in his ear, but Grant shook him off. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a gross overreach of judicial authority. My client has done nothing. Your client's mistress kicked Samuel caught himself, his jaw tightening. Kicked a 7 months pregnant woman in the stomach in open court. Your client has been credibly accused of a pattern of domestic violence. And your client just spent the last 12 hours sending threatening text messages to the victim from burner phones, which Detective Rhodes has already traced back to a location 3 blocks from Mr. Donovan's residence. Hannah watched Grant's face pale. He hadn't known they tracked the messages. Mary had been right, arrogant men always made mistakes when they thought they were invincible. The order stands, Samuel continued. And Mr. Brennan, I suggest you advise your client to take this very seriously. Because I will be watching, and the next violation will be his last as a free man. This hearing is adjourned. The screen went dark. Samuel turned to Hannah, and the fierce judge melted back into the uncertain father. I'm sorry if that was too much. I just couldn't stand the thought of him getting anywhere near you again. It wasn't too much, Hannah said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. It was perfect. Mary was grinning. Judge Hayes, that was the most beautiful piece of judicial intimidation I've ever witnessed. Grant looked like he was about to have a stroke. Good, Samuel said simply. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. It's Detective Rhodes. He says he's found something. He's on his way here now. 20 minutes later, Rhodes arrived with a woman Hannah didn't recognize, late 50s, professionally dressed, with the kind of face that had seen trauma and survived it. Her eyes held a wariness that Hannah recognized immediately. Hannah Miller, this is Dr. Angela Reeves, Rhodes said. She was Victoria Donovan's therapist in the months before Victoria died. Hannah's heart began to race. I thought medical records were confidential. They are, Dr. Reeves said, her voice steady. But there are exceptions when a therapist believes someone's life is in danger. When I saw the news yesterday, saw what happened to you in that courtroom, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Victoria came to me because she was terrified. She told me things about Grant Donovan that I documented carefully, hoping someday they might save someone's life. Now I think that someone is you. She pulled out a folder, thick with notes and records. Victoria was pregnant when she died. The media reported it as postpartum depression, but that was a lie. She was 8 months pregnant, and she was planning to leave Grant. She'd contacted a lawyer, was preparing to file for divorce and sole custody. She told me Grant had threatened to kill her if she tried to take his child away from him. The room went silent. Mary leaned forward, her legal mind already working. Did Victoria mention specific threats? Specific incidents of violence? Multiple incidents. Broken ribs that were treated as a fall down the stairs. A concussion from being shoved into a wall. Burns on her arms that she claimed were from cooking accidents. And 3 days before she died, she came to my office with bruises around her throat. She said Grant had choked her until she nearly passed out, all while telling her that she'd never leave him alive. Hannah's hand went to her own throat, remembering the times Grant had done the same to her. The pattern was identical. He had a script, a method, a way of breaking women down until they believed they deserved it. Why didn't you come forward then? Samuel asked, his tone not accusatory but genuinely curious. I tried, Dr. Reeves said, pain evident in her voice. I went to the police with my concerns the day after Victoria died. But Grant's lawyers got involved. They claimed doctor-patient privilege, threatened to have my license revoked if I spoke publicly. They had affidavits from Grant's doctors saying Victoria had been diagnosed with severe depression and was suicidal. They had witnesses, people on Grant's payroll, who said Victoria had talked about ending her life. They buried me in legal motions until I had no choice but to back down. But you kept the records, Rhodes said. I kept everything. Because I knew someday, somehow, the truth would matter. And when I saw you on the news yesterday, Hannah, saw that you were pregnant, saw what that woman did to you, I knew it was happening again. Grant has a type. Vulnerable women he can control. And when they get pregnant, when they start to develop a love for something other than him, that's when he becomes truly dangerous. Victoria didn't jump, Hannah whispered. He pushed her. I believe so. And I believe Bella Rossi was involved somehow. The police report from Victoria's death mentions a woman matching Bella's description who was seen leaving Grant's building shortly before Victoria fell. But that lead was never pursued. Rhodes was already on his phone, pulling up old case files. If we can place Bella at the scene, if we can establish that she and Grant were involved back then. We can prove this wasn't a crime of passion yesterday, Mary finished. We can prove it was part of a pattern. Premeditated. Conspiracy. Samuel's face had gone pale. How many women, detective? How many has he hurt? We're still looking into it, Rhodes said. But based on what we've found so far. At least 3 that we know of. Jennifer Parker, the first wife who got out alive. Victoria Donovan, who didn't. And Hannah. Hannah felt the weight of it settling over her, the realization that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Victoria, who never got the chance to hold her baby. For Jennifer, who'd been forced to hide and change her name just to survive. For every woman who'd ever crossed Grant Donovan's path and paid the price. What do we do now? Hannah asked. Rhodes smiled grimly. Now. Now we go to war. Because Dr. Reeves isn't the only one who's decided to come forward. I've got 2 former employees of Grant's company ready to testify about how he and Bella were having an affair during his marriage to Victoria. I've got financial records showing massive payments to various individuals right after Victoria's death, hush money, most likely. And I've got security footage from Victoria's building that was conveniently lost during the original investigation but that I managed to track down through a private source. This is enough for criminal charges, Mary said, excitement building in her voice. Not just for Bella's assault yesterday, but for conspiracy, for potential murder charges in Victoria's death. A commotion in the hallway interrupted her. Raised voices, someone arguing with the security guard posted outside Hannah's door. Then Helen's voice, sharp and commanding, I don't care who you are, you're not getting past me. The door burst open, and a woman stumbled in, young, maybe 24, with wild eyes and clothes that looked like she'd been traveling for days. The security guard grabbed her arm, but she wrenched free, her desperate gaze landing on Hannah. Please, the woman gasped. Please, you have to listen to me. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm Grant Donovan's 3rd wife. The one nobody knows about. And if you don't stop him, I'm going to be next. Chapter 6. The hospital room erupted into controlled chaos. Rhodes immediately stepped between Jessica and the door, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. Helen was calling for additional security. Mary was already recording on her phone, making sure every word was documented. And Samuel moved protectively closer to Hannah's bed, as if this young woman might somehow be another threat. But Hannah saw something in Jessica Chen's face that none of them did, the same terror that had looked back at her from mirrors for 3 years. The same exhaustion of a woman who'd been running on fear and adrenaline for too long. Let her talk, Hannah said quietly, and something in her voice made everyone freeze. Please. I need to hear this. Rhodes nodded slowly, though he didn't move from his position. Go ahead, Miss Chen. But understand that anything you say can and will be used in our investigation. Jessica collapsed into the nearest chair, her whole body shaking. We got married 18 months ago. In Vegas. He said it was romantic, spontaneous. He said he wanted to keep it secret because the media would ruin everything, because people would accuse me of being a gold digger. I believed him. She laughed bitterly. God, I was so stupid. You weren't stupid, Hannah said softly. He's good at making you believe. That's what predators do. Jessica's eyes met Hannah's, and in that moment, they understood each other completely. When did you realize? Jessica asked. About 6 months in. When he hit me the first time and then cried and said he'd never do it again. When did you realize? When I saw the news yesterday. Saw you, pregnant and terrified. Saw what his mistress did to you. And I thought, that's what he wanted to do to me. That's what he would have done if I'd gotten pregnant like he kept pressuring me to. Rhodes pulled out his notepad. You're saying you're legally married to Grant Donovan right now? Yes. We have a marriage certificate from Nevada. He made me promise never to tell anyone, said we'd announce it when the time was right. But the time never came. Instead, he got more controlling, more violent. 3 months ago, I tried to leave, and her voice broke. He locked me in our house for a week. No phone, no internet, no way to contact anyone. He said if I ever tried to leave again, he'd make sure I disappeared permanently. How did you escape? Mary asked. He got sloppy. Got so confident that I was broken that he stopped watching me as closely. Last week, when he was busy with his lawyers preparing for the hearing with Hannah, I grabbed some cash he'd hidden in his office, and I ran. Been hiding in motels ever since, trying to figure out what to do. Then I saw what happened in court yesterday, and I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Samuel leaned forward. Miss Chen, do you have proof of this marriage? Any documentation? I have the certificate. I took pictures of it before I ran, stored them in a cloud account Grant doesn't know about. I also have pictures of my injuries, recordings of him threatening me, text messages where he talks about how he handled problems in his past marriages. Jessica pulled out a battered phone. I documented everything, just like those true crime podcasts tell you to do when you're planning to escape an abusive relationship. Rhodes took the phone carefully, like it was made of gold. This is. Miss Chen, this is exactly what we needed. With your permission, I'd like to bring in our digital forensics team to preserve all of this evidence. You have my permission. You have whatever you need. I just want him to pay for what he's done. Hannah felt Grace kick, as if her daughter could sense the shift in the room, the way the balance of power was finally tilting. Jessica, do you know anything about Victoria? His second wife? Jessica's face darkened. He talked about her sometimes, when he was drunk. He'd get this look in his eyes, like he was remembering something that excited him. Once, he told me Victoria had been difficult when she was pregnant, that she tried to take what was his. He said he'd made sure she understood that nobody leaves him. Nobody takes his children away from him. That's a confession, Mary said, her voice tight with excitement. Jessica, would you be willing to testify to all of this in court? I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes. Jessica looked at Hannah again. But you need to understand something. Grant isn't just dangerous because he's violent. He's dangerous because he's connected. Police officers, judges, politicians, he's donated to all of them, has dirt on half of them. That's why he's gotten away with it for so long. People are scared of him. Not all of us, Samuel said quietly. His voice carried the weight of decades on the bench, of a man who'd built his reputation on integrity. Miss Chen, I'm Judge Samuel Hayes, and I just granted Hannah a restraining order against Grant this morning. I also happen to be Hannah's father. He said it with a fierce pride that made Hannah's heart swell. Which means I have a very personal interest in seeing justice done. And I promise you, Grant Donovan's connections won't save him. Not this time. Rhodes was already making calls, coordinating with his team. Within minutes, the hospital room had transformed into a command center. Dr. Reeves was comparing notes with Jessica about Grant's psychological patterns. Mary was drafting legal motions. Samuel was calling in favors from every contact he'd built over 4 decades in the legal system. And Hannah sat in the center of it all, her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move and kick and fight to be born into a world that might finally be safe. Helen appeared at her bedside with water and a knowing smile. Quite the army you've assembled here, sweetie. I didn't assemble anything, Hannah said. They just showed up. That's what happens when you finally stand up for yourself. Good people notice. Good people want to help. Helen checked the monitors, then squeezed Hannah's hand. Your baby's heartbeat is strong and steady. Whatever stress you're feeling, she's handling it like a champ. You're both fighters. A fighter. Hannah had never thought of herself that way before. For 3 years, she'd seen herself as a victim, as someone things happen to. But sitting here, surrounded by people who believed her, who were willing to go to war for her, she felt something shift inside. Maybe she'd always been a fighter. Maybe she just hadn't had anyone in her corner before. Rhodes finished his call and turned to the room. Okay, here's where we stand. The district attorney's office is convening an emergency grand jury. Between Dr. Reeves's testimony, Jessica's evidence, the financial records we've uncovered, and the security footage from Victoria's building, we have enough to pursue murder charges against Grant Donovan and conspiracy charges against Bella Rossi. How long until they can issue an indictment? Mary asked. 72 hours, maybe less. But here's the problem, Grant doesn't know about Jessica yet. Doesn't know we found Dr. Reeves. Once he realizes how much evidence we have, there's a real risk he'll run. He has the money and resources to disappear. Then we need to make sure he doesn't find out until it's too late, Samuel said. We need to keep this quiet, keep building our case, and then hit him all at once with everything we have. What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most had been hiding a dark past? Would you stay silent or speak up, even knowing it could put you in danger? Hannah thought about this as she looked around the room at these people who'd chosen to speak up for her. Jessica stood up, her voice stronger now. I have an idea. Grant is hosting a gala tomorrow night, one of his big charity fundraisers. Every important person in Seattle will be there. He's planning to use it as a PR opportunity, to play the victim, to show everyone how he's being persecuted by his unstable wife and deranged mistress. What if we let him have his moment? Let him think he's won. And then we show everyone who he really is. Rhodes smiled slowly. A public takedown. At his own event. I like it. It's risky, Mary warned. If anything goes wrong. Then we make sure nothing goes wrong, Samuel said. He looked at Hannah. But this is your decision, sweetheart. It's your story, your life. We'll follow your lead. Hannah thought about Victoria, who never got to hold her baby. About Jennifer, forced into hiding. About Jessica, locked in a house like a prisoner. About every woman who'd suffered in silence while Grant Donovan smiled for cameras and collected awards for his charitable work. Let's do it, Hannah said. Let's show the world exactly who Grant Donovan is. The next 36 hours were a blur of careful planning and quiet coordination. Hannah remained in the hospital under Helen's watchful care, her room transformed into a war room where strategies were mapped and evidence compiled. Grace continued to kick and thrive, as if she knew her mother was finally fighting back. Samuel barely left Hannah's side except to make crucial calls and pull strings that only a veteran judge could pull. He moved through the legal system like a surgeon, precise and unstoppable. Watching him work, Hannah began to understand what her mother had loved about him, his quiet strength, his unshakable integrity, the way he fought for what was right without ever raising his voice. I'm sorry I wasn't there, Samuel said late one night, when it was just the two of them in the dim hospital room. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to find Catherine, to find you. I'm sorry for every birthday I missed, every moment I should have been protecting you. You didn't know, Hannah said softly. You thought we were gone. But you're here now, and that's what matters. Samuel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. When this is over, when we've put Grant away and you and Grace are safe, I'd like to be your father. Really be your father. If you'll let me. Hannah reached for his hand. I'd like that too. Grace deserves a grandfather who'll love her. She'll have that. I promise you both, I'm never leaving again. Detective Rhodes coordinated with federal agents. Grant's financial crimes crossed state lines, making this a federal case. The evidence was overwhelming: offshore accounts, money laundering, bribes to officials, hush payments to at least 7 different women over the past decade. Grant had built an empire not just on real estate, but on silence bought and paid for. Mary worked with prosecutors to ensure every legal detail was airtight. Jessica's marriage certificate was authenticated. Dr. Reeves's therapy notes were subpoenaed properly. The security footage from Victoria's building, showing Bella entering an hour before Victoria's death and leaving minutes after, her clothes disheveled and her expression panicked, was enhanced and time-stamped by forensics experts. And then there was the piece of evidence that changed everything, a hidden recording that Victoria's sister had kept for 4 years, too afraid to come forward until now. Victoria had called her sister the night before she died, terrified and desperate, and the sister had recorded the call. Rhodes played it for the team, and the room fell silent as Victoria's voice filled the air, shaking but determined. "Grant told me tonight that if I try to leave, I'll end up like Jennifer. He said Jennifer was smart enough to disappear, but he doesn't think I'm that smart. Lisa, I'm scared. I'm so scared. But I have to protect my baby. I have to." Static, then Victoria's voice again, dropping to a whisper, "Someone's at the door. Lisa, if anything happens to me, you have to tell people. You have to tell them it wasn't suicide. You have to." The recording cut off. Hannah wiped tears from her face. That's her confession. That's Grant admitting he threatened her. "It's more than that," Rhodes said grimly. Because 20 minutes after this call ended, Victoria fell from her balcony. And Grant's alibi was that he was at dinner with business associates. But we tracked down the restaurant security footage from that night, footage that was mysteriously never pulled during the original investigation. Grant left the restaurant at 8:47 p.m. Victoria fell at 9:15 p.m. And Grant's penthouse is exactly 20 minutes from that restaurant. He had time to get there, push her, and get back, Mary said. And Bella was already there waiting, Samuel added. They planned it together. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture of such calculated evil that Hannah could barely comprehend it. Grant hadn't just abused women, he'd orchestrated their destruction with the precision of a business deal. The night of the gala arrived. Grant's fundraiser was being held at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, Seattle's most prestigious venue. Every influential person in the city would be there, politicians, business leaders, socialites, media. Grant had positioned himself as the victim of false accusations, a good man being torn down by vindictive women. His PR team had worked overtime to rehabilitate his image. He had no idea what was coming. Hannah watched the preparations from her hospital room via secure video feed. Rhodes had arranged for undercover federal agents to pose as waitstaff and guests. Mary had coordinated with a sympathetic journalist who would broadcast everything live once the truth came out. And Samuel had called in one final favor. Judge Patricia Morrison, who'd taken over Hannah's case, agreed to have arrest warrants ready the moment Grant incriminated himself. "You don't have to watch this," Helen said gently, adjusting Hannah's fore. "You can rest, let them handle it." "No," Hannah said firmly. "I need to see this. I need to see him fall." Jessica was the key to the plan. She'd agreed to attend the gala wearing a wire, to confront Grant publicly and get him to reveal the truth. It was dangerous, Grant could become violent, but Jessica was adamant. "He needs to know he didn't break me," Jessica had said. "He needs to see my face when his world ends." The video feed showed the ballroom in all its opulent glory. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, champagne flowing freely. And there, at the center of it all, was Grant Donovan in an expensive tuxedo, smiling and shaking hands as if he didn't have a care in the world. Bella should have been by his side, but she was still in jail awaiting trial. Instead, Grant had brought a new date, a young blonde who looked barely 21, already wearing the nervous smile of a woman trying too hard to please. Hannah's stomach turned. He was already hunting his next victim. The gala's program included a speech from Grant, his opportunity to address the unfortunate incidents and thank everyone for their continued support. He took the stage at 9 o'clock, the spotlight making him look almost angelic. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Grant began, his voice smooth and practiced. "These past few weeks have been difficult. I've been accused of terrible things by people I once cared about. But I stand before you tonight with a clear conscience, knowing that the truth will prevail. I am not the monster they've painted me to be. I am simply a man who loved the wrong people, who tried to help women who were unstable and liar. The single word cut through the ballroom like a gunshot. Every head turned toward the entrance, where Jessica Chen stood in a simple black dress, her phone held high, recording everything. Grant's face went white, then red with rage. Jessica. What are you doing here? Telling the truth. Jessica walked down the center aisle, her voice steady despite the terror Hannah knew she must be feeling. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm Grant Donovan's wife. His secret wife. The one he locked in his house when I tried to leave. The one he threatened to kill if I ever told anyone what he'd done. The ballroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Grant's smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold and dead. You're clearly unwell. Security, please escort this woman. I have the marriage certificate, Jessica said, holding up her phone. I have recordings of him threatening me. I have pictures of the bruises, the broken bones, the terror. And I'm not the only one. Victoria Donovan tried to leave him, and she ended up dead. Jennifer Parker tried to leave him, and she had to change her identity and go into hiding. Hannah Miller tried to leave him, and his mistress kicked her pregnant belly in open court. Grant descended from the stage, his movements predatory. You need to stop talking. Right now. Or what? Jessica's voice rose, fearless now. You'll kill me too. You'll push me off a balcony like you did Victoria. You'll have your mistress attack me like you had her attack Hannah. I never. Grant grabbed Jessica's arm, his mask finally slipping to reveal the monster underneath. You ungrateful, I gave you everything. You gave me bruises and nightmares. Jessica wrenched her arm free. You're a predator, Grant. You target vulnerable women, control them, abuse them, and when they try to leave, you destroy them. The journalists in the room were recording now, cameras everywhere. Grant realized too late that he'd walked into a trap. His eyes darted around the ballroom, looking for escape, and that's when Rhodes stepped forward with a dozen federal agents behind him. Grant Donovan, you're under arrest for the murder of Victoria Donovan, conspiracy to commit assault, domestic violence, money laundering, and about 15 other charges. You have the right to remain silent. But Grant wasn't listening. His eyes had found the camera that was broadcasting everything live, and through that camera, he seemed to look directly at Hannah. This isn't over, he mouthed. But it was. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, and Seattle's golden boy was led away in disgrace while cameras captured every moment of his fall. The footage from the gala went viral within hours. Every news station, every social media platform, every conversation in Seattle centered on Grant Donovan's spectacular downfall. The recording of Victoria's final phone call was released to the media, along with the security footage showing Bella at the scene. Dr. Reeves gave interviews about the pattern of abuse. Jessica's marriage certificate was authenticated and published. And through it all, the evidence mounted into an insurmountable wall of truth. Hannah watched it unfold from her hospital bed, Grace kicking steadily beneath her hand. She felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years, hope. You did it, Mary said, standing beside the bed with tears in her eyes. You actually did it. You brought him down. We did it, Hannah corrected. All of us together. Samuel entered the room with news. The grand jury just handed down the indictments. 16 counts against Grant, including first-degree murder in Victoria's death. Bella's facing conspiracy to commit murder, assault with intent to harm an unborn child, and accessory after the fact. The federal prosecutor says it's one of the strongest cases she's ever seen. When's the trial? Hannah asked. 3 months. They're fast-tracking it given the public interest and the flight risk. Grant's being held without bail. The judge ruled that his financial resources and history of witness intimidation make him too dangerous to release. Helen came in for Hannah's evening checkup, her smile wider than usual. Your blood pressure's finally normal, sweetie. And this little one, she patted Hannah's belly, is measuring perfect. If you keep improving like this, we might be able to discharge you in a few days. The thought of leaving the hospital, of stepping back into the real world, filled Hannah with anxiety. Where will I go? Grant knows where I was staying before, and I can't afford. You'll stay with me, Samuel said firmly. I have a house with plenty of room, a security system, and a father's determination to keep you safe. That is, if you're comfortable with that. Hannah looked at this man who'd missed 32 years of her life and was now trying to make up for every single day. I'd like that. Grace should know her grandfather. Samuel's face lit up with joy. Grace. You've named her already? In my heart, yes. Because if we survived all of this, it's nothing but grace. Over the next few days, more victims came forward. Women Grant had dated, employees he'd harassed, business partners he'd threatened. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd spent his entire adult life manipulating and destroying anyone who stood in his way. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source, Grant's own accountant, a man named Paul Hendricks who'd been keeping detailed records of every illegal transaction for years, waiting for the moment when he could finally speak without fear. He made me complicit, Paul told the prosecutors, his voice shaking. He made me hide money, pay off witnesses, create false documents. I have spreadsheets showing payments to police officers, judges, hospital administrators, anyone who could make his problems disappear. I was too afraid to come forward before, but when I saw what he did to that pregnant woman in court, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. The corruption scandal exploded beyond Grant himself. 3 police officers were suspended. A judge was forced to resign. A hospital administrator was arrested for taking bribes to alter Victoria's autopsy report. The rot Grant had spread through Seattle's institutions was finally being exposed and cut out. Meanwhile, Bella Rossi sat in jail and watched her world crumble. Her expensive lawyers had abandoned her once the evidence became public. Her family had disowned her. And when prosecutors offered her a deal, 20 years instead of life if she testified against Grant, she took it without hesitation. He told me Victoria was planning to take everything from him, Bella said in her deposition, her voice flat and emotionless. He said she was going to ruin him, take his money, turn his child against him. He asked me if I loved him, and when I said yes, he said love meant protecting each other no matter what. He said we had to make Victoria's death look like suicide, that it was the only way we could be together. So you helped him, the prosecutor stated. I went to the penthouse that night. I distracted Victoria while Grant came up from the parking garage. We argued, Victoria and me, and she figured out what was happening. She tried to run, but Grant grabbed her. She fought. She fought so hard. Bella's voice cracked. And then he lifted her over the railing and let go. She didn't jump. She didn't want to die. He murdered her and their baby, and I helped him cover it up because I thought he loved me. And now, the prosecutor asked. Now I know Grant Donovan doesn't love anyone but himself. And I'll testify to every single thing he did if it means he never hurts another woman again. The trial began on a cold November morning. Hannah was 8 months pregnant by then, living in Samuel's comfortable home, sleeping in a room he'd converted into a nursery with soft yellow walls and a crib he'd assembled himself. She'd spent weeks preparing for this day, going over her testimony with Mary, practicing how to stay calm under cross-examination. The courthouse was surrounded by media and protesters. Some held signs supporting Hannah and the other victims. Others still believed Grant was innocent, a successful man being torn down by jealous women. But the tide of public opinion had shifted dramatically since the gala. Too many people had come forward. Too much evidence had been revealed. Inside the courtroom, Hannah sat between Mary and Samuel, her hand resting on her belly. Grace was active today, as if she sensed the importance of this moment. Across the aisle, Grant sat in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive suits and charming smile replaced by the hollow-eyed look of a man who knew he'd lost everything. When their eyes met, Hannah didn't look away. She stared at the man who'd terrorized her for 3 years, and she felt no fear. Only pity for how small he looked without his money and power to hide behind. The prosecutor's opening statement laid out the case with devastating clarity. The pattern of abuse across multiple victims. The financial crimes used to cover up his violence. The conspiracy with Bella to murder Victoria. The assault on Hannah orchestrated through coded signals in the courtroom. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every document building toward an inescapable conclusion. Grant Donovan was a predator who'd finally been caught. Grant's defense attorney tried to argue that his client was the victim of a conspiracy, that bitter ex-lovers and opportunistic witnesses had collaborated to destroy an innocent man. But the argument fell flat when Dr. Reeves took the stand and read from her therapy notes, when Jessica played recordings of Grant's threats, when Paul the accountant showed the jury spreadsheets of hush money and bribes. And then it was Hannah's turn. She took the stand with her head held high, one hand protectively on her swollen belly. The prosecutor guided her through her testimony, the courtship that had seemed like a fairy tale, the gradual isolation, the first incident of violence, the escalating terror. Hannah spoke clearly and calmly, never breaking down, never letting Grant see her weak. "Mrs. Miller," the prosecutor asked, "why didn't you leave sooner?" Hannah looked directly at the jury. "Because he made me believe I had nowhere to go. That no one would believe me. That his money and power would destroy me if I tried. And I was right, he almost did destroy me. But what he didn't count on was that I'd survive. That other women would be brave enough to stand with me. That the truth would be stronger than his lies." Grant's attorney tried to break her during cross-examination, suggesting she was lying for money, that she'd provoked the violence, that she was an unstable woman seeking revenge. But Hannah had been through worse than a lawyer's questions. She'd survived Grant Donovan himself. "Sir," Hannah said calmly when the attorney accused her of fabricating evidence, "I have hospital records, police reports, witness statements, and a scar on my ribs from where my husband broke them. I have a daughter who almost died because his mistress kicked me in the stomach. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking justice. There's a difference." The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge had to bang his gavel for order, but even he looked impressed. Witness after witness testified. Jennifer Parker, who'd flown in from her new life across the country, told the jury about the restraining order and the years of looking over her shoulder. Victoria's sister sobbed as she played the recording of Victoria's final phone call. Federal agents explained the money trail. Medical examiners testified that Victoria's injuries were inconsistent with suicide. And finally, Bella took the stand. She looked different from the glamorous woman who'd kicked Hannah months ago. Prison had stripped away the designer clothes and perfect makeup, leaving behind someone who looked tired and broken. But her testimony was clear and damning. "He planned everything," Bella said, looking at Grant for the first time since taking the stand. "Victoria's death, the cover-up, even what happened to Hannah in court. He told me Hannah was trying to trap him, that she was dangerous, that if I loved him I'd help him handle the situation. I thought 'handle' meant we'd expose her lies. I didn't know he meant for me to hurt her until the moment I did it. And even then, I knew he'd orchestrated it. He'd positioned me, signaled me, created the opportunity. I was just the weapon he used." Grant's face turned purple with rage. He lunged toward the witness stand, screaming, "You lying," before bailiffs tackled him and the judge ordered him restrained. The outburst sealed his fate. The jury saw exactly who he was: violent, controlling, unable to maintain his mask even in front of the people deciding his future. 3 weeks later, after closing arguments and deliberations, the verdict came in, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray December morning, the kind of day when Seattle's rain felt less like weather and more like the city itself weeping. Hannah sat in the courtroom for the last time, 9 months pregnant now, grace due any day. Samuel sat on one side of her, Mary on the other, both ready to rush her to the hospital at the first sign of labor. But Hannah had insisted on being here for this. She needed to see it through to the end. Judge Patricia Morrison presided with the stern dignity of someone who'd seen too many cases like this, too many women destroyed by men who believed power meant they could do anything. She looked at Grant Donovan, no longer the millionaire philanthropist but simply a convicted murderer in prison clothes, and her expression held no sympathy. "Mr. Donovan," Judge Morrison began, "this court has heard testimony from 12 separate victims spanning 15 years. We've seen evidence of systematic abuse, financial crimes designed to silence witnesses, and ultimately, the premeditated murder of your pregnant wife Victoria and your unborn child. The jury has found you guilty on 16 counts, and now it falls to me to determine your sentence." Grant sat motionless, his expensive legal team having long since abandoned any pretense that they could save him. His family, parents who'd built the real estate empire he'd inherited, sat in the back row, their faces carved from shame and disbelief. "Before I pronounce sentence," Judge Morrison continued, "the victims have the right to make impact statements. Mrs. Miller, would you like to speak?" Hannah stood slowly, her hand on her belly where Grace was moving, active and alive despite everything that had tried to destroy her. She walked to the podium, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and strong. "Your Honor, 3 years ago I met a man who seemed like a dream. Successful, charming, attentive. He made me feel special, chosen. I was a social worker making $30,000 a year, and he was a millionaire who said he loved me. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive." Hannah paused, gathering her thoughts. "The first time he hit me, I made excuses for him. The second time, I blamed myself. By the 10th time, I was so isolated and controlled that I believed I deserved it. He took everything from me, my job, my friends, my confidence, my sense of self. And when I got pregnant, when I finally had something that was mine to protect, he tried to take that too." She looked directly at Grant, who refused to meet her eyes. "But he failed. My daughter is alive. I'm alive. And every woman he ever hurt is finally being heard. He thought his money and power made him untouchable, but it turns out that truth is more powerful than either." Hannah's voice grew stronger. "I don't want revenge, Your Honor. I want justice. I want every woman who comes after me to know that even the most powerful men can be held accountable. That abuse leaves more than bruises, it leaves evidence. And that silence protects predators, but speaking up saves lives." She turned back to Judge Morrison. "Whatever sentence you give him, make it long enough that he can never hurt another woman again. Make it clear enough that other men like him think twice before raising their hands. And make it mean something, for Victoria, for Jennifer, for Jessica, for every woman whose name we'll never know because Grant Donovan destroyed them so completely." Hannah sat down to absolute silence in the courtroom. Then, slowly, people began to applaud, first the victims section, then the gallery, until even the bailiffs were nodding their approval. Judge Morrison didn't stop them. Jessica spoke next, her testimony brief but powerful. "He made me believe I was nothing without him. But sitting here today, watching him face justice, I realize I was always something. I just needed to remember it." Jennifer Parker, the first wife, spoke via video link from her undisclosed location. "I've spent 8 years hiding, 8 years looking over my shoulder, 8 years believing he'd find me and finish what he started. Today, I can finally stop running. Today, I can finally breathe." Dr. Reeves testified about the psychological damage Grant had inflicted, the calculated way he'd broken women down and rebuilt them as extensions of his control. Paul Hendricks spoke about the financial crimes and the web of corruption Grant had spun throughout the city. Even Grant's former business partners testified about his explosive temper and the threats they'd received when they tried to end their relationships with him. Finally, Victoria's sister stood and addressed the court through tears. "My sister was 28 years old. She was brilliant, kind, and so excited to be a mother. He took that from her. He took her life, her baby's life, and 15 years of our family's peace. We've lived with questions and guilt and what-ifs for 4 years. Today, we finally have answers. Today, Victoria can rest. Judge Morrison listened to every word, her expression growing grimmer with each testimony. When the last victim had spoken, she turned to Grant. "Mr. Donovan, do you have anything to say before I pronounce sentence?" Grant's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, probably advising him to show remorse, to beg for mercy. But Grant shook his head and stood on his own. "I loved them," he said, his voice lacking any trace of the charm that had once defined him. "Every single one of them. I gave them everything, money, status, opportunities they never would have had without me. And they repaid me with betrayal, with lies, with attempts to destroy everything I built." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "You loved them," she repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. "Mr. Donovan, love doesn't leave bruises. Love doesn't require control. Love doesn't end in murder. What you call love is actually possession, and the women you loved were simply objects you believed you owned." Grant's face flushed with rage. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Judge Morrison cut him off. "I've been a judge for 23 years, and I've seen hundreds of men like you. Men who believe their money and status entitle them to treat women as property. Men who charm and manipulate until they get what they want, then destroy anyone who tries to leave. You're not unique, Mr. Donovan. You're not special. You're simply a predator who finally got caught." She opened the sentencing document. "For the murder of Victoria Donovan and the death of your unborn child, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the attempted murder of Hannah Miller and her unborn child, conspiracy to commit assault, witness intimidation, money laundering, and 12 counts of domestic violence, I sentence you to an additional 45 years, to run consecutively. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison, where you will never have the opportunity to hurt another woman." Grant's face went white. His attorney started to object, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm ordering that all of your assets, every property, every investment, every dollar in every account, be liquidated and divided among your victims as restitution. You came into this courtroom as a millionaire. You'll leave as a prisoner with nothing but the consequences of your actions." The gavel came down with finality. Bailiffs moved to take Grant away, and for the first time since the trial began, he looked at Hannah. Really looked at her. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't remorse or regret, it was impotent rage, the fury of a man who'd lost everything and couldn't understand how it had happened. Hannah smiled at him. Not a cruel smile, but one of triumph and freedom. She'd won. They'd all won. As Grant was led away, he began screaming, thrashing against his restraints, his careful mask finally shattered completely. The courtroom watched as Seattle's golden boy revealed himself as nothing more than a violent child throwing a tantrum because he couldn't have his way. The doors closed behind him, and Hannah felt something release in her chest, a weight she'd been carrying for 3 years, maybe longer. She was free. Truly, finally free. 2 weeks later, on a snowy Christmas Eve that turned Seattle into a winter wonderland, Hannah went into labor. Samuel drove her to the hospital, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles while trying to maintain the calm demeanor of a man who definitely wasn't panicking. "Breathe, sweetheart. Just breathe. We're almost there." "I am breathing," Hannah laughed between contractions. "You're the one who needs to breathe, Dad." The word made Samuel's eyes well up, just as it did every time she said it. He'd insisted she call him Samuel at first, said she needed to be comfortable, but Hannah had started calling him Dad 3 weeks ago and hadn't stopped. It felt right. It felt like coming home. Helen was waiting at the hospital entrance, somehow having known exactly when Hannah would arrive. "There's my girl," she said, helping Hannah into a wheelchair. "Ready to meet your daughter?" "So ready," Hannah said, and she meant it. The labor was long but not complicated. Mary arrived with flowers and encouragement. Jessica came with a stuffed elephant she'd bought for Grace. Dr. Reeves stopped by to offer support. Even Detective Rhodes appeared briefly, having developed a protective fondness for the woman whose case had consumed 6 months of his life. But it was Samuel who stayed through everything, holding Hannah's hand, wiping her forehead, telling her she was strong and brave and doing beautifully. Being the father he'd missed the chance to be 32 years ago, making up for lost time with every word of encouragement. At 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside the hospital windows, Grace Catherine Hayes Miller came into the world weighing 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her mother's determined spirit. Hannah held her daughter for the first time and sobbed, not from pain or fear, but from overwhelming joy and relief. Grace was perfect. Grace was healthy. Grace was safe. After everything, they'd both survived. "She's beautiful," Samuel whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his granddaughter. "She looks just like you. Just like Catherine." "She looks like hope," Hannah said. "She looks like a second chance." Helen checked Grace's vitals, her professional demeanor cracking into a wide smile. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong heartbeat, perfect breathing. "This little one's a fighter, just like her mama." Over the next few days, visitors flowed through Hannah's hospital room, a steady stream of the people who'd fought beside her, who'd believed her when the world told them not to, who'd helped her reclaim her life. They brought gifts and well wishes, but more importantly, they brought love. Bella's sentencing came through while Hannah was still in the hospital, 18 years for conspiracy to commit murder and assault. She'd serve her time in a federal prison, her glamorous life reduced to a cautionary tale about the cost of loving the wrong person. The financial restitution from Grant's liquidated assets was divided among his victims. Hannah's share was substantial enough to buy a house, finish her education, and secure Grace's future. But more valuable than the money was the knowledge that Grant's empire, built on the suffering of women, had been completely dismantled. On New Year's Eve, Hannah sat in Samuel's living room, her living room now, because he'd insisted they were family and family lived together. Grace slept in her arms, tiny and perfect and blissfully unaware of the war that had been fought to ensure her safe arrival into this world. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, settling into the chair beside her with 2 cups of tea. "I'm thinking about how a year ago, I was trapped in a nightmare, convinced I'd never escape. And now I'm here, with my daughter, with my father, with a future that actually looks bright. It doesn't seem real." "It's real," Samuel assured her. "You made it real. You were brave enough to speak up, strong enough to fight back, and smart enough to let people help you. That's all you, Hannah. That's all your strength." Hannah looked down at Grace, at this tiny person who depended on her completely. "I want her to grow up knowing she's never trapped. That she always has choices, always has people who'll support her, always has the right to be safe and loved and free." "She'll know," Samuel said. "Because she'll have you as her mother. And she'll have all of us, this whole crazy extended family you've built, making sure she never doubts her worth." The clock struck midnight, and fireworks exploded over Seattle's skyline, visible through the large windows. Grace stirred but didn't wake, secure in her mother's arms. Outside, the city celebrated a new year, new beginnings, new possibilities. Hannah closed her eyes and made a wish, not for revenge or justice, because she'd already won both. Not for safety, because she'd finally found it. But for every woman still trapped in the nightmare she'd escaped, every victim still too afraid to speak up, every person who believed they deserved the abuse they suffered. She wished for them to find their voices. To find their strength. To know that even the most powerful predators could be brought down when survivors stood together and refused to stay silent. "Happy New Year, Grace," Hannah whispered to her sleeping daughter. "You were born into a world that tried to destroy us, but we're still here. We survived. And we're going to make sure you grow up in a world that's just a little bit better than the one we knew." Grace yawned and settled deeper into her mother's arms, and in that moment, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that everything, all the pain, all the fear, all the fighting, had been worth it. They'd won. Not just the trial, not just the battle against Grant Donovan, but the war for their right to exist safely and freely in the world. And that, Hannah thought as she kissed her daughter's forehead, was the only victory that truly mattered. 3 years later, Hannah stood in a conference room addressing a group of domestic violence survivors, her work as an advocate having taken her across the country. Grace played quietly in the corner, supervised by her grandfather Samuel, who'd retired from the bench to spend more time with his family. "Your story doesn't end with your trauma," Hannah told the women gathered before her. "Your story ends with your survival, your strength, your decision to speak up and fight back. You are not victims, you are survivors. And together, we're making sure no one has to face this battle alone." The Grant Donovan case had become a landmark in domestic violence law, cited in courtrooms across the nation. The evidence-gathering techniques, the victim coordination, the public exposure strategy, all of it had been studied and replicated in dozens of cases since. Grant himself was exactly where he belonged, in a maximum security prison, his health failing, his name synonymous with domestic violence and corruption. He'd tried to appeal 3 times. Each appeal had been denied. Bella had been released after serving 12 years with good behavior. She'd moved to a different state, changed her name, and dedicated herself to speaking about the dangers of codependency and toxic relationships. She'd never contacted Hannah, but she'd sent a letter once, simple and direct: "I'm sorry. I should have protected you instead of hurting you. I hope you and your daughter are happy." Hannah had kept the letter, not out of forgiveness, some things were too big to forgive, but as a reminder that even people who'd done terrible things could sometimes find redemption. Jessica had married a kind accountant and was expecting her first child. Jennifer had finally stopped looking over her shoulder. Victoria's family had established a foundation in her name to support pregnant women escaping abuse. And Hannah? Hannah had found her purpose. She'd finished her master's degree in social work, specializing in domestic violence intervention. She'd written a book about her experience that had become a bestseller and required reading in law enforcement training programs. She'd testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections for abuse victims. But more than any of that, she'd become exactly what Grace needed, a mother who was strong, free, and surrounded by people who loved them both. Samuel walked over with Grace, who was now a talkative 3-year-old with her mother's eyes and her grandfather's determined spirit. "Mama, when do we go home?" "Soon, baby. Mama's almost done." Grace nodded seriously, then looked at the women in the room. "My mama's a superhero," she announced. "She fights bad guys." The women laughed, and Hannah scooped her daughter into her arms. "That's right, Grace. And someday, when you're bigger, I'll teach you how to be a superhero too." As they left the conference center, Hannah looked back one last time at the women she'd been speaking to, women at the beginning of their journey to freedom, women who were just starting to believe they deserved better. She thought about the terrified pregnant woman who'd climbed the courthouse steps 3 years ago, convinced she was going to lose everything. That woman had been certain she'd die alone and powerless, that Grant would win, that justice was only for people who could afford it. That woman had been wrong. Justice had come. Freedom had come. And with it, a life more beautiful than Hannah had ever dared to imagine. She kissed Grace's forehead, took Samuel's offered hand, and walked out into the Seattle sunshine, no longer a victim of her past but the author of her future. And somewhere in a maximum security prison, Grant Donovan sat in a cell and finally understood what it meant to be powerless, to be trapped, to have lost everything that mattered. The predator had become the prey. The abuser had become the imprisoned. And the woman he tried to destroy had become the one thing he could never be. Free.
Thank you so much for watching. Seriously, your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, the biggest way you can show me love and encourage me to keep creating is to hit that like button and subscribe. Takes 1 second, but it makes a huge difference.